Tonight is Lag BaOmer. Mamash Motzoi Shabbos is Lag BaOmer. So I thought, therefore, it would be appropriate to give a shiur about Lag BaOmer. It's interesting, just the way it's celebrated is with a huge bonfire. And so what I'd like to go into actually is to resolve certain questions, which I think really in many ways, the answers of which would highlight what Lag BaOmer is really about. I think most people who are into Lag BaOmer are just into Lag BaOmer. I think most people don't really understand the tremendous hashkafa significance of Lag BaOmer. So there are several questions. First of all, why is it celebrated with a bonfire? And they're huge. They're trying to make it as big as possible. So that's the first question you can ask. Another question is, we noticed that there are only two individuals whose yahrtzeits are celebrated or commemorated by hundreds of thousands of people. And that's Rachel Imenu, right, which occurs on Yud Aleph Cheshvan, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which occurs on Yud Ches Iyar, which is Lag BaOmer. One, Rachel Imenu is a name. She's as I say, she's a matriarch. But why her? No other of or aim of the Jewish people is celebrated. So there are thousands and thousands of people on Yud Aleph Cheshvan that go to her kever in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Shimon is a Tano. He's one of the people, obviously, one of the great Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. And but he's a Tano. He's not an Ov. Why all of a sudden is everybody celebrating Rabbi Shimon for a long time? And we're not. I think the meaning to goes back a couple hundred years, but it doesn't go back further than that. So why Rabbi Shimon? What is the significance about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that 500,000 people are going to his kever in Merom this Lag BaOmer? I'm talking about 500,000 people. I remember when I went, when I was there so a long time ago, I had gone, I think there was only maybe 30 or 40,000 people. It's more than 40 years ago. And today's, we're expecting more than 500,000 people. That's a lot of people. And the question is, why are they all going? They have each one has their own individual reasons or whatever, But the question is, what does it mean in terms of the hashkafa that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrtzeit is commemorated by so many Jews? Not so much what's on their mind, but what's in the air, so to speak. What can it signify? So those are the questions that I'd like to answer. And in the end, really, what I think is very good news, why this is happening. So that's what I want to try to answer tonight. What is the significance of Lag BaOmer? Why are these two people, the only two people really, that are commemorated and celebrated? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Why these two? And certainly, I think, why is it growing? Certainly by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it's growing tremendously, So that's the question. In order to understand really what's happening today with Rabbi Shimon, and also with Rachel Imenu, we have to understand something. We have to go back to understand a certain very important phenomena of Judaism. What is that phenomena? There's a concept called the Or Rishon, which is a messianic light. That is a very hidden commodity. Very. What exactly is the Or Rishon? We have to understand that. What is it really? And it's funny because the whole Bria, the whole creation, is waiting for that Or Rishon, for that messianic light. But what is it when it comes? And the idea to the Or Rishon is really the concept called total knowledge. You see, whenever you see something happen, an event, then what we realize is that that event happens, but what's the cause of that event? Why does it happen? Everything has ultimately some type of cause. And the question is, what is the connection between the immediate event that we see, the phenomena itself, and the cause of that phenomena? Most of reality is concealed from us. We don't really see. We don't see what the connections are in many of the ways. And it's not only true of the physical world. We don't know. Nobody knows what gravity really is. There are theories, Einstein and so on. But there's an enormous amount of concepts which are concealed, even from scientists. And science, of course, is busying itself trying to figure it out. And then, of course, because of that insight, they can change enormous amount of civilization. But when you look at the Jewish world, when you look at the Torah, we have almost absolutely no insight as to cause. All the mitzvahs that we do, we don't really know why, what the connection is between the mitzvah itself and the ultimate cause. We don't know why. When somebody puts on tefillin, we don't know what happens. We put it on. There are halachic requirements, right? It's got to be black, and so on. All the halachas that are engaged in film, or mezuzah, or shechita, or any of these things, why? What does it all mean? We don't see any result from the mitzvahs we do in terms of the mitzvah itself. We don't see the connection, you see. So therefore, we don't know why they're necessary. We believe they're necessary. We believe that they are part of what we need to do, clearly because the Moshe commanded us to do, but we have no understanding of what the action of a mitzvah is, really. So really we lack an understanding of reality. Because a mitzvah is not just a commandment of God. It is something that connects to reality. Something happens in reality. It's not just that we do the will of God when we do a mitzvah, you see. There is something that ties this mitzvah, or this action that we do, to an ultimate place in reality. It happens to be that we do it because there's a commandment, a tzivui, you see. So when we do the mitzvah, we fulfill his commandment. Not only that, we make him happy because we are observing his commandments. So Moshe has what's called a nachas ruach, a simcha, a happiness. Not only that, we ourselves benefit from it. But the question is, what happens in reality? We don't know. Will we ever know? And the answer is, of course. What the messianic light is, the Or Mashiach, is the revelation of total reality. It's when we will see the true cause, origin of every mitzvah, how it connects to reality, how it connects to all the spiritual dimensions, domains, what will happen, and so on. That is an incredible insight, and that's what happens in the concept called the Or Rishon, the first light, which is also called the messianic light. It's called the concealed light, the Or Hagonus. But that's what happens, a total understanding of reality, you see, from the beginning to the end. Therefore, ultimately speaking, that's really what the Rebbe wants to do in the end. He wants to show us how everything we did actually interfaced, interconnected with reality itself. It wasn't just an arbitrary commandment that we should do, but even on that we receive reward because we have listened to God. But what he wants to show us is much more, you see, that all of the mitzvahs are predicated on some aspect of reality, and when we did the mitzvah, we actually changed or influenced some aspect of reality, which for us benefited us tremendously. That's a whole different understanding, It's like in the olden days, they would see lightning and thunder. Why is there lightning and thunder? They had no idea. So people made up all kinds of fancy excuses. But today we know what lightning and thunder is. Sound waves, light, the difference between the charge between the earth and the sky, positive and negative, all of a sudden releases an incredible amount of electrons. This is all known today, you see. But 2,000 years ago, nobody had any idea why you have lightning and thunder. And you have the other millions of different phenomena that happens. Therefore, what the Or Rishon really is, the messianic light, is an understanding of total reality. And I want to tell you something. It's not just reality of the mitzvahs, which we are completely, basically oblivious to. It is the reality of science also. The entire reality, physical reality, is explained by that Or Rishon. All of it. Science, whatever that be. Physics, chemistry, biology, it doesn't make a difference. And then of course there's Torah, all the halachas, all the Shulchan Aruch, everything is explained. And not only is that explained, every historical event is explained too. You see, who are the Jews? Why are they goyim? Why the Holocaust happened? Why is there 2,000 years of exile? And so on. All of the events, and it's not only national, it's also personal. Your personal life will be revealed. Why everything that happened to you happened. What was the cause? You see, that's a lot of information, right? It's an incredible amount of information, but it will happen. All of it is assumed under the title called the Or Rishon, messianic light. You see, so therefore, what the messianic light fundamentally is, it is a disclosure of an enormous amount of information, right? That will happen. That is an explanation of total reality. It's the best way to say it. You see, so as such, it's not another Torah. It's Torah revealed at a different level. Got it? That's really what it is, and so on. How pervasive will it be? Will it be? Enormous. And the famous pasuk in the Navi, Ki mol ha'oretz deo es Hashem, because the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, as the waters, ki mayim mechasim, as the waters covers the seabed. So therefore, the sins which are so therefore the amount that the lights of the spheres change to water, right, is proportionate to the amount of sins that people did. So it's interesting that Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says that if you want to know the relationship or the proportion between the sins and the messianic light, which is really what should have happened, then just compare the ark, Teva, the volume of the Teva, to the volume of the water on the planet after the Mabul. I mean, it's absurd. We're talking about water that rose and rose, right? And it wasn't just the seas, but the water rose to enormous height. So if you calculate all the water that rose to that height and look at it as a proportional ratio to the volume of the ark, it's like the ark was like maybe 0.000001. That's all the amount of righteousness that was available, and the rest was all chatoim, sins, and therefore the water was overwhelming. You see the proportion. The amount of water equals the amount of sinning done, because that's the amount of all messianic light that has to be changed to water, which obviously is staggering. You see. And that's really the reason why the Banshim destroyed the earth. Because in that climate where you have such incredible evil, there's no bechira left. There's no free will left. In other words, you may have free will, but the options, right? If 99.9999% that option is evil, and the amount of good that's available to choose is 0.00001, well, what are you going to do? There's no bechira. That's not bechira. When the overwhelming tendency is to do evil, it's over with. That's why the Moshe had to destroy the world, because the world cannot exist with such an overwhelming force of evil, as opposed to an underwhelming force, if there's such a word, of good. That's why he destroyed the world. So when the Mabul ended, the Banshim, interesting, he said, no longer will I ever destroy the world that way. I will no longer destroy the world that way. And the reason why that's so interesting is that in order to do that, the Banshim changed something. Because in the beginning, when there's free will, right? So then, hey, you do what you want. I'm not going to stop you. Because if you guys want to go along and destroy the whole planet, your deal. That's fair. It means you give me free will, let me do what I want. So if the world wants to be thoroughly evil, which it basically became, so they have the right to be thoroughly evil. But what that resulted in was the destruction of the planet. So what the Moshe did after the Mabul, when he swore that he wouldn't do it again, what he really did is that he said, you guys can only destroy up to 90%. 10% you can't destroy. In other words, even your free will cannot destroy 10% of good. There has to be at least 10% of good left. And therefore I don't have to destroy the world. That's really what changed, you see. So what he did is he limited the consequences of your action. That you cannot wipe out the world anymore. Yeah, there are different local places that can do it. That's true. He could bring a Mabul on what he did to Egypt, or he did to, what do you call it? Who? Sodom was fire and brimstone. But what he did to, what do you call the hurricane? What's the?
Sandy.
Not Sandy. Well, Sandy was also. Katrina, yeah. That was really a mini Mabul. People don't realize that.
It was in Thailand, no?
Who?
Tsunami in Thailand or whatever.
That was an earthquake. Yeah, then you had the tsunami. Yeah. So every once in a while, the Moshe shakes up the planet, brings a tsunami, which is really a mini Mabul. That's really what it is. Don't fool yourself. It's a mini Mabul, destroys different parts, because they have obviously put so much evil there that the Moshe says enough is enough. But he won't destroy the planet, so he limited the amount of free will, which is very interesting. You see, or else today, if man had the free will today to do what he wants, right? The amount of evil today, you wouldn't even have the teva. You have a rowboat. You have to put all the animals in the rowboat. That's where we'd be left. So forget it. The Moshe saved the world by doing that. But in any case, we now understand what the Mabul was by Noach. What the flood was, the Mabul, is what? It was the Orishon, the messianic light, that should have come down in his day, right? It was changed to water, a water analog, right? Which is what the messianic light becomes, from top to bottom, and so on, and destroyed the entire world. And we now understand what the Mabul was, and what the Moshe did to stop any future destructions of the planet. You see. Well, this is a very important idea, which most people are not aware of what the Mabul really was. And if you remember, did I say this on the Pesach Shiur? The whole job of Moshe Rabbeinu was to undo the Mabul. You see, I'm going to throw that in. Moshe Rabbeinu was called Moshe. Why? Because Moshe means from the water, I withdrew him from the water. You see? Why was he called that? Because the job, Moshe Rabbeinu was a Gilgul of Noach. That's the Ari says. Right? And Noach failed to stop the Mabul because he never warned the generation sufficiently. You see, so that was a big chasson in Noach. So Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ari says, is a Gilgul of Noach that came back to do what? To stop the Mabul, because that's what he failed to do. Well, how do you stop the Mabul? And that's why it's called Moshe, right? To draw them out of the water. Where was the Mabul in the time of Moshe? Kriyas Yamsuf. The splitting of the Red Sea. That really was the Mabul. That was the Mabul that wiped out Egypt. You see? But when the Jews walked in, it split. So therefore that was the undoing of the Mabul. You see? So when the Jews walked in, what Moshe had done is that the Mabul could not destroy the Jews. You see? That was the undoing of the Mabul for them. But for the Egyptians, it resumed being what it was, which is a flood, and wiped them all out. See, that's why, since the Mabul did not destroy the Jews in Kriyas Yamsuf, that's why you had a Kriyas Yamsuf. It wasn't by accident. It was meant to symbolize that the flood was rectified, was corrected. So Moshe Rabbeinu lived up to his purpose and so on, And of course, at Har Sinai, they received the Orishon, which is the first tablets, the Luchas Rishonos. You see, that's why the Mabul couldn't destroy it, because they had succeeded in restoring those elemental 10 spheres to produce the Mabul. Great. So we now have enough material to understand Lag BaOmer. See, you needed this as an introduction. Now, let's take a look. When was the Mabul supposed to happen? Right? Well, let's check out the flood. When was the flood supposed to happen? Because we know that the flood in the time of Noach is the messianic light turned to water. So the question then is, when was the Mabul supposed to happen, right? Which would have been the Orishim. And the answer is, Yud Aleph Cheshvan. That's when it was supposed to come down, on the 11th day of Cheshvan. What happened on that day? It didn't come down. It came down on the 18th of Cheshvan. Why? Because if you remember, Mesushelach died on the 11th day of Cheshvan, right? So Moshe didn't want, because he was such an incredible tzaddik, right? So he allowed people to mourn for the death of Mesushelach for 7 days. That's a shiva. And when that day was over, he brought the Mabul. So the Mabul was postponed for 7 days because of the death of Mesushelach. But when you think about it, the real day that the Mabul happened, should have happened, which is really the messianic light that should have come down, is the 11th day of Cheshvan. You see? Who died on the 11th day of Cheshvan? Rachel. There you are. What does Rachel mean? What does that mean, signify? Because Rachel is part of the redemption. We know that from the Navi, right? He says, the Moshe says to Rachel, hold back your tears. Your children will come back to their borders and so on and so forth. Rachel Imenu is part of the Geula itself. In fact, the reason why she died in Beis Lechem on the 11th day of Cheshvan was in order to that the Jewish people, when they were exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, they passed by her grave on the way to Babylon, Bavel. And so she died on that day at that spot. So when the Jews passed by, they will pray to Rachel Imenu to save them. And there's an incredible medrash that Rachel saved them. You see, and that medrash, it's an incredible medrash where it says that the Jews were going to Babylon and they were finished. There was no redemption for all the sins that they did with the loss of the 10 tribes, and so on, the Avodah Zarah of Menashe, and so on. But in any case, so what happened was they prayed to Rachel, and because of that prayer, that instigated or enabled her to stand in front of the Beis Din. There's a whole medrash on that. It's a whole, what happened on that Beis Din. Everybody was a who's who, as they say in Judaism, try to defend the Jews. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron. It was just incredible. Shmuel Hanavi, But nobody could defend them. See, the Moshe said no, because the judgment is they must be exiled permanently. Or whatever, for who knows how many years. So Rachel came in front of the court, and she said, I want to defend the Jews. So what was her defense? She said, look, when I was supposed to marry Yaakov Avinu, right? What happened, right? My sister Leah, she was incredibly depressed and distraught, broken, because she was really supposed to marry Esav, and Esav is a Russia, right? So what I did is something which is incredible. I walked over, now Yaakov gave me simonim, signs, code words, that I should say to him under the chuppah, so he'll know it's me. Why? Because Yaakov knew that Lavan is going to try to switch the girls, which is of course what he did, right? Because that Lavan was the real character, So Yaakov said to Rachel, listen, if he tries to do this, I'm going to ask you, psst, psst, what's the code, right? Means, and if you tell me the code, then I know it's you, and we get married. If you don't answer me, I know he switched, then it's over with, right? So what did Rachel do? Rachel goes over to Leah and says, listen, we both know what dad is going to do, and so on. So what happened? So she gave the code words to Leah. Leah goes under the chuppah, which of course is what Lavan did, and Yaakov says, no, what's the code? So Leah told him the code, you see? Because she knew it because Rachel told her. So of course he therefore married Leah, And it was only in the morning that he found out it was Leah, and the whole thing, exploded. And so on. Okay. So here's what Rachel said, an incredible defense. She said the following. She said, listen, I'm not coming to you mitzad din, in terms of the law. Because according to the law, you're right, God. And nobody can beat that. Whatever the accounting, the reckoning is, that's the law. But I'm not coming for that. What I did was incredible. Why? Because what I did is I gave the codes to my sister Leah, and therefore she married Yaakov. Now, you have an idea what kind of risk that was? Because Yaakov could have said to me, how dare you do that? You're a co-conspirator to make me miserable, or to destroy my whole purpose, which is to marry and have shvatim, right? So therefore, I don't want to marry you. You're out. Right? I mean, imagine you're marrying a girl, and you wind up with some other girl under the chuppah because your intended bride, right, revealed the secrets. Hey, that's called the ultimate breach of trust. Right? And that's the worst thing in a marriage. You see, when you lose trust in a spouse, the marriage is basically over. But it's very hard to restore trust, which can happen in many, many ways. But in any case, that's what she said. So I took an incredible risk. You see, he could have rejected me. Not only that, whoever heard of a woman giving up her husband or her future husband to her rival, Leah? Whoever heard of something like that? So therefore, why did I do it? Because I felt terrible for Leah, because I realized her position. And therefore, I had rachmanis on Leah. I had incredible compassion for her situation. So I put myself in an unbelievable risk. Jeopardized my... Imagine what that could have meant if Yaakov would have said to her, hey, I don't want to know you anymore. That means she would not be an aim, a mother in Klal Yisrael. She would have lost a status which is unparalleled, to be a matriarch in Klal Yisrael. There would be no Rachel. It would be just Leah, and that's it. So look at what she risked. Fortunately, Yaakov, of course, did not do that for whatever. So she said to God, listen, I gave up everything for rachmanis. So therefore, what I'm asking you is that mitzad hadin, according to the law, you're right. They cannot be redeemed for who knows how long. But I'm saying on the merit that I was compassionate. What is mercy or compassion? It is the suspension of justice. So therefore I ask you to suspend the judgment, the justice, and redeem them. And that claim was so incredibly powerful that God said, fine. They will go into exile for 70 years. And after 70 years, I will redeem them. And that's so therefore, that's what happened. You see. So therefore, Rachel saved the Jews and redeemed the Jews. Without that, we'd still, who knows how many years after that we'd be in Golus. So her taina saved the Jewish people and therefore redeemed them. You see. And therefore, Rachel is part of the redemption. Therefore, she dies on Yud Av Cheshvan in order for the Jews to do that, so they should be redeemed. But remember, she died on Yud Av Cheshvan because that is a day of the redemption, isn't it? Because that's the day of the Orishan. Okay, it was turned to water, but really it should have been the messianic light. So her death occurred on the very day of the messianic light's revelation, and that's exactly what she did. She redeemed them. So Rachel, the Jewish people realized that she is a pivotal player in the Geul of Klal Yisrael. Rachel Imenu, you see. Important, okay? So we now understand the importance of that, and so on. So therefore, Yud Aleph Cheshvan, and maybe that's why Yud Aleph Cheshvan doesn't have a Cheshvan does not have a Yom Tov. Why? Because every month, Jewish month has a holiday. The only one that has nothing is Cheshvan. Why? Because since the Orishan, the Messianic light, should have happened in Cheshvan, think about that. Therefore, in Cheshvan, maybe there's a tremendous presence, or maybe that's when the Messianic light will be revealed again. You see, and therefore, that will be celebrated 1,000,000 times more than every of the Yom Tov. In other words, in the end result, Cheshvan will have a Yom Tov called the Redemption, right? And that will be celebrated more than every other month. So maybe in order to compensate for that, it doesn't have anything now. Because what it will have will be awesome. You see? Great. Now, he does? That's interesting.
The new base in English will be built on Cheshvan. He says that's the Yom Tov.
Very good, okay. So I was mechavan. Okay, now if you think about it, I personally have what's called a negius. I have something connected to that Yud Aleph Cheshvan because that's my birthday. It's Yud Aleph Cheshvan, so I'm biased. You know, I was born on Yud Aleph Cheshvan, so wow, well, whatever that means. But anyway, so we understand now what Yud Aleph. We understand the Mabul, Rachel Imenu, why she died there. But the real reason is because that day signifies the release of the Orishim. Fine. Now, there is an argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Which day was the world, not the world was created, but which day is the day that Adam Rishon was created? Because that's really what it is. So Rabbi Eliezer says that Tishrei, that the month of Tishrei, Adam Rishon was created on Aleph Tishrei, and the world was therefore created 6 days before, whatever. But Rabbi Eliezer says that the world was created in Tishrei. And therefore, therefore the Torah says that the Mabul happened in the second month on the 18th day, or the 17th day, right? And that is when the Mabul happened, because the second month after Tishrei is Cheshvan. But Rabbi Yeshua says no, that really the world was created in Nisan. Interesting. Aleph Nisan is when the world was created, or rather Adam Rishon was created, right? And then the world was created 6 days before that, which would be Chafei Adar. In any case, so therefore, according to his reckoning, the Mabul happened on when? Iyar. It happened on Iyar, right? According to him, right? But it didn't happen on Yud Aleph Iyar because we know, it happened on, right? But it happened on Yud Ches Iyar. What is Yud Ches Iyar? Lag BaOmer. Is it not? Right, Lag BaOmer. That's tonight.
How do we move from Yud Aleph to Yud Ches?
Because the Mabul action in Cheshvan never happened on Yud Aleph. It happened. Yes, yeah. No, but so obviously once that happened, it leaves what's called a Roshim. That means it's a day which is also Masugel, which is also propitious for the Orishim. Because once it comes out that day, that leaves a mark on that day. You see. So therefore, what happens? Therefore, in the 18th day of Iyar, which is today, Lag BaOmer, tonight and so on, right? According to him, that's when the Mabul happened. You see. So if that's the case, that means the Orishon was released when? It was released on the 18th day of Iyar. Because the water is the analog of that messianic light. Isn't that interesting? Who died on Yud Ches Iyar? Rabbi Shimon. What does Rabbi Shimon have to do with the messianic light? Because you can connect them now. Because think about, remember, what is the messianic light? Remember what I said? The Orishon is a revelation of total reality, right? What's total reality? The interface or the connection between the spiritual worlds, right, and the physical universe in every which way. But wait a minute, do we have such a study about that today? The answer is yes. That's Kabbalah. Kabbalah really, if I had to term it, is really surface messianic light. Because Kabbalah is the study of what? Of the spiritual domain of reality that connects God to the physical universe. It's a study of the entire spiritual domain, all the components of that domain, how they interact, the spheres, and so on and so forth, and the various different ways of the divine manifestation, right? The study of the angels, all the alamas. That's what Kabbalah is. It's nothing more than a study, right, of the spiritual structure of the creation. And that's what Kabbalah is. But the amount of Kabbalah that we know is very little. So therefore, the Kabbalah is really surface messianic light. That's really what it is. You see, which is interesting,
Okay.
What?
Okay.
It's okay. How do we see this? Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went up, when Moshe Rabbeinu gave he broke the luchos, he broke the tablets. So God said to him, the Moshe said to him, Yashkoyach, congratulations. What? What do you mean congratulations? How did Moshe Rabbeinu know that he was allowed to break the luchos? How did he do that? You know, when the Moshe gave Moshe Rabbeinu the first tablets, the luchos, he was supposed to bring them to Klal Yisrael, right? If Klal Yisrael doesn't deserve it, so what do you do with the luchos? You give it back to God. You don't break it. You know, if somebody gives you a gift to give to somebody else, right? Because the guy's going away, right? I give you a gift. I'm going away, so do me a favor. Bring this to Reuven, right? So you bring so I leave, right? And you go to Reuven, you knock on his door, and say, I have something for Reuven. So his wife answers and says, oh, I'm sorry, Reuven is not here, you know, or whatever. So what do? I take the gift, I throw it, you take the gift and put it in the garbage? Excuse me. You wait till I come back and you give me back my gift. You don't throw it in the garbage. Yes? So the question then is, Moshe Rabbeinu is supposed to give this Luchos Rishonos, these tablets, to the Jewish people. So what does he do? He shatters it at the bottom of the mountain. Okay, fine. You don't want to give it to the Jewish people? Fine. Because whatever, they're not deserving of it, right? So you tell God, excuse me, I can't give it to them, they're not around, take it back. Why didn't he do that? It's astounding. So not only did he not do that, he shattered it. And God said, Yashkoyach, congratulations. Wow, how did he know this? Good question. And what was the significance that Moshe Rabbeinu broke it? Why didn't he give it back? Not only because that's appropriate to do with a gift that you can't give to the receiver. What is behind? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was an incredible leader. And you always have to know the politics in heaven, if I may use that word. What does that mean? You have to know the anhoga of God. You know, if you're leading the Jewish people, you have to know how to represent the Jewish people to God. If not, you have big problems. So Moshe Rabbeinu knew, what is this Luchos Rishonos? What are these first tablets? The first tablets is the messianic light. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is real the Mashiach ben Yosef. And he's supposed to be ushered in the messianic era and give it to the Jewish people. You see. So God gives him the Luchos Rishonos, the first tablets. And that's what he's supposed to do. And all of a sudden God says to him, excuse me, Lech Raid, you need to go down because your nation has corrupted themselves. Which means you can't give it to them. Because these messianic light is so powerful, if you give it to them in their state of sinning, it will kill them. Because that's what happens when you take too much Kedusha and you're not ready for it. You see. So that's what, so the Moshe says, I'm sorry, they corrupted themselves, go down. Wait a minute. Why didn't God say, give it back to me? Because at that point in time, already he knew that they could not receive it. You see? So what he should have said right then and there, because he was talking to God, okay, I got your point, take it back. But the Moshe never asked for it back. You see? Because at that point in time, it's not that he found out that the receiver's not home later on. He knew then that he couldn't give it while he was talking to God. And the answer is because the Moshe never told him. So Moshe Rabbeinu understood God does not want it back. I don't want it back. You figure out what to do. So Moshe Rabbeinu had this incredible dilemma. What should I do? See, if I give it back to God, I can say, God, listen, they're not going to get it, so take it back. That means that the Jews will never have any insight into Kabbalah, into the spiritual worlds at all, until the Mashiach comes. But that's terrible. At the same time, I can't give it to the Jews, because if I give it to them, it'll kill them. So I will compromise. I will bring it down and smash it, shatter it. So therefore, what did the Jews do with the pieces of the Luchos Rishonos? They took those pieces and they put it in the Oren, right behind, the second tablets. So what's the benefit? Because since the Jews have the first tablets, they have it, therefore the Shefa, the incredible spirituality of that will still remain with the Jews. They can have some kind of connection to it, but they can't read it because it's shattered. So what would have killed them is if they can read it, then they would have understood that or and it would have killed them. But the fact that it's in the or in itself and it's in their possession automatically allows them to have some type of connection. And that connection is Kabbalah. You see, that is the Orishan, but it's surface. And we can only have that, and that was the brilliance of Moshe Rabbeinu. So we still have a connection to the messianic light, but it's not enough to kill us. So therefore, and that's why God said, Yashikoyach, congratulations. Because you knew I didn't want it back, and I didn't want it back, because I felt the same way you do. But I left it up to you to figure out the compromise. So I'm glad you did that at least the Jews have some type of connection with this incredible hasaga of a comprehension of a divine, of the divine light. You see, even though they can't read it, okay, and of course they are able to survive. Therefore, we have access to it, but we don't have it that we can understand. So we survive. But that access to it is what allows us to have Kabbalah. That's what does it, you see. So Rabbi Shimon dies on when? Yud Ches, the 18th day of Iyar. Why? Because that was the day of the Orishan. But wait a minute, he died on that day. Why? Because what he had done was given the Kabbalah to the Jewish people, you see. And that's part of the undoing of the Mabul. By giving the Kabbalah to the Jewish people, right? And the death on that day signifies that he had given the Orishan, at least in its surface stage, to the Jewish people. You see, that's really what his mission was. So therefore, he had undone the Mabul, you see. And not only that, his death happened on the day of Yud Ches when the Mabul happened. So therefore, the Mabul happened, which is really the messianic light. He dies on that day to show that he gave the messianic light, not in its water form, right, but in its messianic form, you see. And therefore, what that meant, of course, is that therefore he died on that day. And that also answers a question. Rabbi Shimon said to his son, it says in the Chazal that in the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there was no rainbow. Why? Why wasn't there a rainbow? Because a rainbow is to tell God not to destroy the world. Yes? So Rabbi Shimon's contribution was, why? Because the world is evil, and therefore they cannot have the messianic light. It'll only be in the terms of flood. But Rabbi Shimon introduced Kabbalah, the Zoya and so on, right? And therefore Rabbi Shimon was Mesakein, the Mabul. He rectified the Mabul, so then if that's the case, there's no water, there's messianic light, at least on its surface, so then what do you need a rainbow for? God doesn't need a rainbow, because he's not going to destroy the world. Why? Because the flood had a tikkun, it had a rectification. Isn't that interesting? See the way it works? And that's why in his day, there was no rainbow, because there's no necessity for it, because Rabbi Shimon, introducing the Kabbalah, brought a tikkun, obviously, rectification for the whole concept of the Mabul, the messianic light, in the form of water. And that's why there was no rainbow. Very interesting, isn't it? And so on, you know. And therefore Rabbi Shimon dies on that day. Now that we understand that, we understand in many ways Lag BaOmer. Why do the Jews celebrate these two people? Because there's a famous statement in the Gemara, Im einam neviim b'nei neviim heim. If the Jews are not prophets, but they are the sons or the children of prophets. What does that mean? This was said in a whole story with Hillel and on Pesach. The question then was, if Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos or whatever, so what do? You have to shech the Korban Pesach. You have to slaughter the Korban Pesach. So the question is, you can't carry a knife, to the Beis Hamikdash. So what are they going to do? So Hillel said, listen, we don't know. The Bnei B'Seira actually, they were the Gedolim then. So we don't remember. But let's take a look at what the Jews do. Because if they're not prophets, somehow they're going to figure out, right? Because they have the concept of prophecy in them. So they have a divine gift of being able to prophesy or know what to do. And all of a sudden they saw that they took the knife and they connected it to the sheep. So the sheep were carrying the knife, whatever. So that's a famous statement. They may not be prophets, but they are the children of prophets. And therefore they have the gift of prophecy, even though it's very, very mild. So that's the same concept why the Jews celebrate Rachel and Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because Rachel, they go, because she is the redemption. Everybody knows claw like that, right? And therefore they go to pray that the Mashiach should come. So therefore Rachel Imenu is tied to the whole redemption process. What about Rabbi Shimon? Somehow the Jews know that Rabbi Shimon is connected also to the redemption process. Even they don't know why. But we know why. Because Rabbi Shimon unfolded what? The messianic light in the form of surface Kabbalah. You see? And therefore, if that's the case, so Rabbi Shimon represents what? The messianic light. So therefore they celebrate Rabbi Shimon because he's also, in a certain sense, he rectified the Mabul, right? He brought down the surface of the messianic light. So therefore, he is part of that Gilui, revelation of that light. And that's why they have bonfires. Because it's or, isn't it? It's the light of what? That bonfire really represents the messianic light. You see, even though those guys who are lighting it don't know, but that's really what the light is. It represents the messianic light, and the Jews intuitively know, you see, that you have to go to Rabbi Shimon and be mispal and celebrate, because that man's Kabbalah is what it's all about eventually. You see, and it's interesting, the Pasuk says, and the world will be filled with the knowledge of God, which is what? Which is the messianic light, as the waters covers the earth. You see, what do you mean the waters cover the earth? So not only does it tell how pervasive, but water is the analog of the knowledge of God, which is the messianic light, isn't it? Right? So the amount of light is equal to the amount of water, because when the light is in the analog called water, it covers the earth. Almost the Pasuk is Marama is that. Interesting, So therefore that's why. And I believe that there's more and more people going to Rabbi Shimon. And there's 500,000 people there, but right now, actually it's certainly is 7 hours ahead in Eretz Yisrael, and they're going the whole night. I mean, you have rebbes going there, you have lights, it's like a whole, Chad Gadol, what can I say? It's enormous what goes on there, you see? And why more people? Because I believe, same concept, that the Jewish people know something, even if they don't know it, they know it unconsciously, even if they don't know it consciously. And what's that? That the Mashiach is about to arrive. So there's more and more Jews that are connecting with that incredible prophecy, even if be unconscious, and therefore more and more Jews are taking part in the incredible revelation, Gilui, of this messianic light, which is celebrated through the bonfire that is part of the whole celebration of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So we now have all the questions answered. See, why these two people? Because they're both connected with the messianic light, and they're both connected to when the Mabul happened, which was the analog, physical analog of the Orishon, you see. So they both have something to do. Rachel, because she died on that day, right? And Rabbi Shimon, right, because it happened on that day, according to Rabbi Yeshua. So therefore, these two people represent the redemption, the messianic light, which is the key to the redemption, you see. And as a result of that, the Jews, more and more people are going, and really what it is, Lag BaOmer is really a yontif of Mashiach. That's really what it is, you see. And maybe that's why everybody's got this tremendous drive to light the fires and so on. I find it interesting that it's raining outside now. So is that the physical analog of the Orishon that's turned to water? Right? Interesting. So I'm wondering, but it's going to stop, which means the physical, and maybe that's why it started. Moshe wants to say, until now, I think it will stop. Until now, it was water. That was the messianic light, right? Because that's its analog. So pour the whole Shabbos, right? But now by Lag BaOmer it's going to stop, because what the Moshe was saying, by the way, that the messianic light has now been turned from water, which is the rain, into the ore itself, and therefore you can go ahead and light. Who knows? Maybe that's the reason for what's been happening today, and so on, But in any case, Lag BaOmer is a messianic holiday. Really, that's really what it is. And Klal Yisrael knows that unconsciously, and that's why they go to Rachel Imenu, and they of course go to Rabbi Shimon. And let's hope that that it's true, that there will be a messianic light very shortly, and so on. Let's hope that that's going to happen, and so on. For Lag BaOmer and so on, Any questions?
Well, how is this? So what are you saying? We're celebrating Rabbi Shimon because of
because he represents the messianic light.
Or what did he do Did he do something for us?
Yeah. No. Kabbalah.
So
the Zohar.
So what did that do
Sure.
for us? That allows us to touch the Orishon when
It allows us to study Kabbalah.
So it allows us to touch the Orishon before.
Yeah, because the Zohar is the fundamental textbook of Kabbalah. In other words, it revealed to us the Kabbalah and allows us to study.
And why are we celebrating Rabbi Shimon more than, let's say, Moshe Rabbeinu, who gave us the Torah, or Avraham Avinu, who kicked off the whole?
Because Rabbi Shimon gave us the Zohar, right? So that indicates, right, that the Kabbalah itself can now be revealed. So the first phase or stage of the revelation was Rabbi Shimon's Zohar. Because when it came to Rabbi Shimon, finally, you were allowed to reveal the Kabbalah, which means that there was a great tikkun, rectification of the original Mabul.
So
he's the forerunner, he's the beginning.
The forerunner of the Torah Mashiach.
Correct, exactly. That's what he is.
What about the Bahir? Did they come before?
No. The Bahir came, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the Rebbe of one of the Rebbes of Rabbi Akiva. At the same time, the same Tekufa. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Bahir, and that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he wrote the Bahir, and he was one of the Rabbeim of the Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Shimon was a student. So, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, by the way, was the biggest makubal in that generation.
So why don't we celebrate him?
Because he didn't write a Zohar.
What's the difference between a Zohar and a Bahir?
Because in order to write a Zohar, you have to be given permission. And that permission means the time is ready that the Jews can now access the Kabbalah, in that form. Oh, well, you mean the Bahir? Because there's no comparison between the Zohar and the Bahir. The Bahir is a short.
Accessible, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the Zohar is the magnum opus of Kabbalah. It's like, it's the main text of Kabbalah.